Hi guys, so I'm going to be reading chapter 11 from Charlotte's Web today, and I cannot tell you enough how much I've been enjoying this book. I know Miss Alonso and Miss Delgado have been reading the other chapters, and I got to read up to chapter 11 yesterday because I was preparing for the chapter that I'm going to read, which is 11, and I'm loving this story. I think it's a really great story. So I'm excited to read today, and I just want you kind of to like summarize so far what's happened in the book. In the previous chapter, just think to yourself what happened in the last chapter. How is Wilbur feeling? What is Charlotte doing? And so something that I read yesterday when I was reading chapter 10, the chapter before, Charlotte's really trying to help Wilbur. She really enjoys his company. She really likes him. They're really good friends. And he found out in a previous chapter through the sheep that he would end up being basically dinner for Christmas, right? They're gonna end up killing him to make him into like a Christmas dinner, and it's around summertime right now. So she's trying to figure out how she can kind of trick the farmer. I think his name is Zuckerman or Zimmerman, trying to trick him so that they don't end up killing Wilbur. So we're going to find out. And as I'm reading, I'm going to show you some vocabulary words that we might encounter that might be a little difficult. And then also just kind of understanding like how he's feeling or what's going on in the story in the text. So this is chapter 11. I'm not going to tell you the title of the chapter. At the end, I'm going to ask you guys to write what you think would be the title of this chapter. So the miracle. The next day was foggy. Everything on the farm was dripping wet. The grass looked like a magic carpet. The asparagus patch looked like a silver forest. So we weren't sure whether or not you would know what asparagus is because it's not a very common vegetable eaten by Guatemalans or Salvadorians or Mexicans. So I'm going to show you a picture. Let me see if I can share my screen. Yeah. And so we got a picture of asparagus here. This is what asparagus looks like. It's a yummy vegetable. On foggy mornings, Charlotte's Web was truly a thing of beauty. This morning, each thin strand was decorated with dozens of tiny beads of water. The web glistened in the light and made a pattern of loveliness and mystery, like a delicate veil. So when something glistens, it kind of like it shines a little bit, and a veil is something that covers. I'm going to read that line again. The web glistened in the light and made a pattern of loveliness and mystery like a delicate veil. Even Lurvy, who was particularly interested in beauty, noticed the web when he came with the pig's breakfast. He noted how clearly it showed up, and he noted how big and carefully built it was. And then he took another look, and he saw something that made him set his pail down. There in the center of the web, neatly woven in block letters, was a message. It said, "Some pig." Lurvy felt weak. He brushed his hand across his eyes and stared harder at Charlotte's Web. "I'm seeing things," he whispered. He dropped to his knees and uttered a short prayer. Then, forgetting all about Wilbur's breakfast, he walked back to the house and called Mr. Zuckerman. "I think you better come down to this pig pen," he said. "What's the trouble?" asked Mr. Zuckerman. "Anything wrong with the pig?" "Not exactly," said Lurvy. "Come and see for yourself." So I'm going to ask you to just think to yourself. You don't have to write. I just want you to think. How do you think Mr. Zuckerman is going to react when he sees the spider web? And I'm going to show you what it looks like. This is what she wove in her web. She wrote "some pig" with her web. So I want you to just think to yourself, how is Mr. Zuckerman going to react to when he sees the web? You might have said he's going to react like maybe he's going to be scared or he's going to be surprised, right, to see that an animal or an insect was able to write that. Let's keep reading to find out. There were two men. The two men walked silently down to Wilbur's yard. Lurvy pointed to the spider's web. Do you see what I see, he asked. Zuckerman stared at the writing on the web. Then he murmured the words, some pig. Then he looked at Lurvy. Then they both began to tremble. Charlotte, sleepy after a night's exertion, smiled as she watched. Exertion is another juicy word, and I'm going to show you. We have a picture of it, or we wrote it down. So an exertion is when you've been working really hard on something, maybe typically physically, right? And that's what she did all night. She was working on writing some pig. So Charlotte, sleepy after a night's exertion, smiled as she watched. Wilbur came and stood directly under the web. Some pig, muttered Lurvy in a low voice. Some pig, whispered Mr. Zuckerman. They stared and stared for a long time at Wilbur. Then they stared at Charlotte. You don't suppose that that spider, began Mr. Zuckerman, but he shook his head and didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he walked solemnly back up to the house and spoke to his wife. Edith, something has happened, he said in a weak voice. He went into the living room and sat down, and Mrs. Zuckerman followed. I've got something to tell you, Edith, he said. You better sit down. Mrs. Zuckerman sank into a chair. She looked pale and frightened. When somebody looks pale, their skin looks like they lose the blood in their cheeks. They get really white. And so here's a picture of like somebody who's very pale. Edith, he said, trying to keep his voice steady, I think you had best be told that we have a very unusual pig. So unusual means strange or not normal. A look of complete bewilderment, right, confusion came over Mrs. Zuckerman's face. Homer Zuckerman, what in the world are you talking about? She said. This is a very serious thing, Edith, he replied. Our pig is completely out of the ordinary. What's unusual about the pig? Asked Mrs. Zuckerman, who was beginning to recover from her scare. Well, I don't really know yet, said Mr. Zuckerman, but we have received a sign, Edith, a mysterious sign. A miracle has happened on the farm. There was a large spider's web in the doorway of the barn cellar, right over the pig pen, and when Lurvy went to feed the pig this morning, he noticed the web because it was foggy, and you know how a spider's web looks very distinct in a fog. And right spang in the middle of the web, there were the words, some pig. The words were woven right into the web. They were actually part of the web, Edith. I know because I've been down there and seen them. It says, some pig, just as clear can be. There can be no mistake about it. A miracle has happened and a sign has occurred here on earth, right on our farm, and we have no ordinary pig. Well, said Mrs. Zuckerman, it seems to me you're a little off. It seems to me that we have no ordinary spider. Oh no, said Zuckerman. It's the pig that's unusual. It says so, right there in the middle of the web. Maybe so, said Mrs. Zuckerman. Just the same, I intend to have a look at that spider. It's just a common gray spider, said Zuckerman. They got up, and together they walked down to Wilbur's yard. You see, Edith, it's just a common gray spider. Wilbur was pleased to receive so much attention. Lurvy was still standing there, and Mr. and Mrs. Zuckerman, all three, stood for about an hour, reading the words on the web over and over and watching Wilbur. Charlotte was delighted with the way her trick was working. So delighted means like excited, right? She thinks this is wonderful. She sat without moving a muscle and listened to the conversation of the people. When a small fly blundered into the web, just beyond the word pig, Charlotte dropped quickly down, rolled the fly up, and carried it out of the way. After a while, the fog lifted. The web dried off, and the words didn't show up so plainly. The Zuckermans and Lurvy walked back to the house. Just before they left the pig pen, Mr. Zuckerman took one last look at Wilbur. You know, he said in an important voice, I've thought all along that pig of ours was an extra good one. He's a solid pig. That pig is as solid as they come. You notice how solid he is around the shoulders, Lurvy? Sure I do, said Lurvy. I've always noticed that pig. He's quite a pig. He's long and he's smooth, said Zuckerman. That's right, agreed Lurvy. He's as smooth as they come. He's some pig. When Mr. Zuckerman got back to the house, he took off his work clothes and put on his best suit. Then he got into his car and drove to the minister's house. So minister is like somebody kind of like Opal's dad, and because of Winn-Dixie, so he's in charge of the church, right? He stayed for an hour and explained to the minister that a miracle had happened on the farm. So far, said Zuckerman, only 4 people on earth know about this miracle. Myself, my wife Edith, my hired man Lurvy, and you. Don't tell anybody else, said the minister. We don't know what it means yet, but perhaps if I give thought to it, I can explain it in my sermon next Sunday. There can be no doubt that you have a most unusual pig. I intend to speak about it in my sermon and point out the fact that this community has been visited with a wondrous animal. By the way, does the pig have a name? Why, yes, said Mr. Zuckerman. My little niece calls him Wilbur. She's a rather queer child, right? Queer, we learned in a previous chapter, means strange. She's full of notions. She raised the pig on a bottle, and I bought him from her when he was a month old. He shook hands with the minister and left. Secrets are hard to keep. Long before Sunday came, the news spread all over the county. Everybody knew that a sign had appeared in a spider's web on the Zuckerman place. Everybody knew that the Zuckermans had a wondrous pig. People came from miles around to look at Wilbur and to read the words on Charlotte's web. The Zuckermans' driveway was full of cars and trucks from morning till night, Fords and Chevys and Buick Roadmasters and GMC pickups and Plymouths and Studebakers and Packards and DeSotos with gyromatic transmissions and Oldsmobiles with rocket engines and Jeep wagons and Pontiacs. These are all names of cars. The news of this wonderful pig spread clear up into the hills, and farmers came rattling down in buggies and buckboards to stand hour after hour at Wilbur's pen, admiring the miraculous animal. All said they had never seen such a pig before in their lives. When Fern told her mother that Avery had tried to hit the Zuckerman spider with a stick, Mrs. Arable was so shocked that she sent Avery to bed without any dinner as punishment. In the days that followed, Mr. Zuckerman was so busy entertaining visitors that he neglected his farm work. When you neglect something, you don't take care of it. So that means he's not taking care of the farm. He wore his good clothes all the time now, got right into them when he got up in the morning. Mrs. Zuckerman prepared special meals for Wilbur. Lurvy shaved and got a haircut, and his principal farm duty was to feed the pig while people looked on. Mr. Zuckerman ordered Lurvy to increase Wilbur's feedings from 3 meals a day to 4 meals a day. The Zuckermans were so busy with visitors they forgot about other things on the farm. The blackberries got ripe, and Mrs. Zuckerman failed to put up any blackberry jam. The corn needed hoeing, so this is what hoeing is. So it's when you start to gather it, and Lurvy didn't find time to hoe it. On Sunday, the church was full. The minister explained the miracle. He said that the words on the spider's web prove that human beings must always be on the watch for the coming of wonders. All in all, the Zuckerman's pig pen was the center of attraction. Fern was happy, for she felt that Charlotte's trick was working and that Wilbur's life would be saved. But she found that the barn was not nearly as pleasant to many people. She liked it better when she could be alone with her friends, the animals. So I want you right now in your reader's notebook. So if you don't have that yet, I'm going to ask you to go get it. I'm just going to stop share for a second. So go get your reader's notebook right now. All right, so you should have your reader's notebook now, and I am going to ask you to write out this table. So, and it's going to be short. We're just going to really talk about probably what Wilbur feels like. He hasn't really talked in this chapter. So you're going to write this chart out: inference about character traits, textual evidence, and this makes me think, right? And thinking about motivation maybe. So write it down, pause it so you can write it down, and then you should be back. Okay, so let's make an inference about Wilbur, because he really isn't saying much, but he was standing right underneath what Charlotte made in the web. So let's think about how he's feeling, and let's see if we can pull some evidence from the text. So I'm going to go in here and try to write. So whatever I'm writing, you can write at home. So I think Wilbur is feeling, like what is he feeling? I'm gonna go back in the text to think about what is he feeling. So I'm gonna go back. This is when they first see some pig in the web. Some pig, whispered Mr. Zuckerman. They stared and stared for a long time at Wilbur. Then they stared at Charlotte. You don't suppose that the spider, began Mr. Zuckerman, but he shook his head and didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he walked solemnly back up to the house. So there's just a lot going on right now for Wilbur. So I think Wilbur is feeling probably very excited after Charlotte leaves the words "some pig" in her web, because Mr. Zuckerman, his wife, and his worker Lurvy are taken aback. When I say taken aback, it means like you're like you just can't believe, or let's maybe use the word in disbelief. So Lurvy are in disbelief to see what is written on the web. Let me read that again just to make sure I have not made any mistakes. So I think Wilbur's feeling probably, let's put probably over here. I think Wilbur probably is feeling very excited after Charlotte weaves the word "some pig" in her web, because Mr. Zuckerman, his wife, and his worker Lurvy are in disbelief to see what is written on the web. He must think his life will be saved because now he's getting a lot of attention from the town. And we see that, right? We see that now he has like a lot of people visiting his pig pen to look at him and to look and see what Charlotte wrote in the web. Another reason he's excited is that he's getting more food, right? He went from 3 meals a day to 4 meals a day. So he's probably very excited about that. And here's some evidence on page 81. It says, Wilbur was pleased to receive so much attention. Lurvy was still standing there, and Mr. and Mrs. Zuckerman, all three, stood for about an hour reading the words on the web over and over and watching Wilbur. So I might say, I know this. I know Wilbur is feeling excitement because on page 81, the author writes, and I'm going to copy part of that quote, Wilbur was pleased to receive so much attention, right? We have our evidence. So this makes me think, right? And it's the motivation. What was Charlotte's motivation for writing what she wrote? This makes me think Wilbur will not end up being their dinner for Christmas. I don't think at this point they're so excited to see this and they consider it a miracle. I'm thinking that he's not going to end up being dinner because they've never seen anything like this before. So I want you, last thing, and you can just write it in your reader's notebook, but to make a prediction for the next chapter, like what do you think is going to happen in the next chapter? Bonus. I know sometimes we do ask you guys to do this, but try to write out your own summary like Mrs. Alonso did. And then instead of writing chapter 11, I think I showed you the wrong one. Instead of writing chapter 11, I have the title of the chapter. I'm not going to say what it is. I want you to come up with your own chapter name. Like, what would you name this chapter? Look how beautiful her summary looks. Like, I want you guys to try that too. So prediction, and try writing a summary in your reader's notebook. See you guys in the next video.